Well, good evening, everybody. We're waiting for Angela. She had to work late tonight, but we expect her to come on shortly and just to talk about where we're at. Got to turn that phone off. Doesn't stop ringing. I think, well, we're about 3 weeks out from the election, so we're really pushing hard now to identify supporters so we can get them to the polls on the election. And then we got to make sure the vote is counted. We've heard all kind of threats from Donald Trump that the mail-in ballots are fraudulent, and he's egged on these white vigilantes, these so-called militias, which are actually illegal in every state. You can't have private military forces. One thing we're demanding is that state governments, attorneys general, district attorneys start enforcing their own laws, because these people are out there causing mayhem. We've had the Oregon legislature shut down by an armed demonstration of these militias over a piece of climate legislation earlier this year. Same thing happened in Michigan over COVID public health measures that were before the legislature. And they've had armed demonstrations outside a number of other state capitals. And Trump is encouraging them, egging them on to go out and do voter intimidation. So the election, whether you're voting early or voting at the polling place on November 3rd, doesn't end November 3rd. We got to be ready to go out in the streets. Our campaigns got standing. We can go into the courts, and we got to fight to make sure the vote is counted. I mean, right now the polls look like Trump is toast. He's going to get slaughtered in a landslide if the vote is counted. The battleground states have moved from the upper Midwest, where Biden's ahead, nearly double digits, to states like Georgia, Texas, Arizona. So if the polls hold, it's going to be a 2-to-1 landslide in the Electoral College for Biden, if the vote is counted. So we got to be prepared to make sure that happens, not just because we want Trump to go, but we want the votes that the Green Party got counted, because that determines whether we even have a ballot line after this election. And people can ask me about different states, but we have a real problem maintaining the ballot in a number of states, like my state, New York. The Democrats tripled the number of votes we need. So we need 2% of the vote. It's somewhere between 160 and 200,000 votes. And if we don't get the ballot line retained, we have to go out and get 45,000 signatures in a 6-week window, which is about now the most difficult of any state in the country. So, yeah, Trump is a wannabe autocrat, but the Democrats are no slouches either, because they're trying to wipe out the Green Party. We've seen that in the court cases, and we see it in this law in New York, and we see it in the, pitch from even prominent progressives, run up the vote for Biden, forget about the Green Party this time. Well, if we disappear, it's going to be hard to get back on the ballot. In New York State, the Socialist Party was a real force from the early 1900s till 1938, when Norman Thomas came up short. They never got their ballot line back. So those are some of the stakes in this election, and I hope people are activated. So we're going to start off tonight with a special guest from the 5th District of Congress in Minnesota, Minister Toya Woodland, Green Party candidate for Congress. She's a social justice activist, done a lot of work on housing. She's for Medicare for all, and particularly on criminal justice issues, community control of the police, fair employment. She's a real advocate for the people, and I expect her to show up on camera here in a minute, and she will tell you more about herself and the issues she's running on. There she is. Hi, Minister Toya.
Hi, how are you doing, Mr. Hawkins?
I'm doing good. So tell us about your campaign. Tell us a little bit about you and what your key issues are.
Well, I am a mother of 2 adult male children. And I realized when I was raising my 2 sons how unfair and unjust this system was, especially towards African-American males, young Black men. So I had to become an advocate for my children at an early age, from kindergarten to when they graduated from high school, even in college, even in the military for my oldest son. Um, and just sort of fight the system. And I said, well, there are so many young people or so many people in this country who are feeling the same afflictions that my children are feeling, that I'm going to broaden this fight. I'm not only going to fight for my children, but I'm going to fight for all children. I want to fight for all people who are being treated unjustly. I just want to do more. So I started becoming an advocate in schools. I started standing up against administrations on behalf of children with IEPs and 504 plans, and young African Americans that could not, parents who could not be there. I was there. And then I expanded that and went from African Americans to all children who had special needs. I not only did that, but I worked on a campaign to reduce drug sentencing here in Minnesota, and we won that campaign. We actually got first and second degree drug sentencing reduced for mainly users. It was mainly people who were using drugs, but they made using drug a crime rather than an addiction that needed to be healed. Addiction is a mental illness as classified by the DSM-5. So we worked on that. I have done numerous things, worked on housing and various things here in Minnesota. So I decided last year that I was going to run for the 5th Congressional District, because we had no one here that was putting us first. We are the 4th worst place in America for African Americans to live, here in the 5th Congressional District in Minnesota. And the very worst place in all of Minnesota for African Americans to live. So we put together a campaign. We launched it in March, and we started letting people know that I was running, and I decided to run green, which was which I had never ran. So I guess this is the first party that I ever wanted to run with. And so we got our signatures. We turned in 1,400 signatures, and they tossed out 800 of them. But I did not quit. I kept going because I'm not a quitter, and I believe that this fight is worth fighting.
Yeah, well, ballot access is a big issue for us. You know, you want to run for Congress or the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, you need 10 signatures. You want to run for Congress in India, you need 2 signatures. In New Zealand, their parliament, 2 signatures. Australia, 50 signatures. Canada, 100 signatures, although in the rural ridings, that's their jurisdictions, it's 50 signatures. And the highest I could find, because I don't speak all these languages, was Germany. The Bundestag, their Congress, is 200 signatures.
Oh my God.
And Minnesota's not bad. You needed 1,000 and you turned in 1,400, right?
Yes.
Well,
in a COVID.
Yeah, well, that made it difficult this year. But in New York, it's 3,500. In Oregon, it's 5,000. In Illinois, it's over 15,000. In Georgia, it's over 20,000. In Indiana, it's over 40,000. I mean, we're off the charts. And people ask, why don't we run more greens? It's hard as hell to get on a ballot without a ballot line. So, I'm glad you're keeping on and raising the issues and, building the network. And we'll get that ballot line in Minnesota one of these years.
I hope so. I've been active in my campaign. I've been doing pretty good as a write-in. I had a write-up on WCCO in their electoral guide, so you can find out more about me in the electoral guide. I've done quite a bit of interviews, but I've been doing interviews for a long time because I've been on this platform. I've had this platform for a while. I've been an activist and a community organizer for a while. So when I said I was running, a lot of the media already knew who I was. So I get a little attention there, but it would have been a lot different had I been on the ballot. I do believe it would have been a lot different. And I feel that I should have been given that ballot access because I was the only third party candidate outside of yourself that got all of our in outside of yourself and a couple of others, but only third party candidate for running for 5th congressional. They got all of my signatures in the pandemic, and so my governor said we weren't even supposed to be outside, but he made no special allowances for us to be for third party candidates at all.
Yeah, we appealed to state governments all over the country. Most of them did not, make accommodations when we asked. Vermont did. And so Vermont has a lot of presidential candidates because we talked to them and they said, in this pandemic, let's just let everybody run and run. States like New Jersey and Maryland made accommodations for electronic signatures. And I believe you got that in at least for our presidential petition in Minnesota. In
We did have
Ohio,
electronic signatures. None of us knew how they worked though at first because we had to go from May to June 2nd, so that had never happened for us before. So no one really. We were like the experimental group. So by the time you guys had to get presidential signatures, people were like, we kind of knew what to expect. But when I had to get my signatures, no one really knew how that worked or even wanted to take that chance on doing it electronically for them to be thrown out.
yeah, that's right. You had to get them before we got that accommodation from the state of Minnesota. Some states we sued, like Ohio, and the judge said when they did the lockdown, they made an exception for First Amendment activities. And he said petitioning was a First Amendment activity and totally ignored our argument that we didn't want people to risk getting sick by being out there physically petitioning. But we appealed that and lost again. And we could have gone to the Supreme Court, but limited resources and time. And we ended up getting on the ballot anyway in Ohio. So it worked out. But it's been a gauntlet, just to get on the ballot and run, let alone get into the debate and get covered. So I feel you. I've been through that in local races as well as this presidential race.
But I've really enjoyed being out and talking to people and sharing my views. And one of the big things that I am running on is reparations, which I am so glad that the Green Party fully supports. We are the only party that supports full and complete reparations for American descendants of slavery, and I am very grateful for that. And you as well, Howie, for being a presidential candidate with a Black agenda that includes reparations, unlike the two major party candidates.
Yeah, they don't even want to talk about that subject. And I mean, it's so obvious given the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, and discrimination going right down to the last decade. Because the Obama administration didn't prosecute these predatory lenders and foreclosures, Black America lost half its wealth in the last decade.
Yes.
How about reparations for that? Those homes were stolen. We got criminals now in the Trump administration, Steve Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross, who are at the center of that. Wilbur Ross owned these mortgage servicing companies that did all that robo-signing, which was computerized fraudulent documents to take people's homes. And it was disproportionately impacted Black people. And here we are. How about reparations just for that? I mean, it seems so obvious, but the major parties don't even want to talk about it.
I don't understand why it's so difficult to want to see the wealth gap shorten. When we talk about crime, we talk about getting control over crime. We talk about all of the things that have been happening as far as, I call it oppression on oppression crime. I don't call them Black on Black crime. I call it oppression because the people who are committing these crimes have been oppressed for hundreds of years, generation to generation to generation. And my theory is that you put a person and a group of people in one room and they all have one bowl of rice to fight over. it's going to be a fight to the death. So, and that's basically what's been happening in the Black community. So when it comes to reparations and crime lessens when, absolutely lessens when people have hope, when they can provide for their families, when they can feed their children, when they can when they are living comfortably. Crime goes down. Crime is, if you want to stop crime, Biden's way was to create one of the largest crime bills in America, and reboot mass incarceration amongst African American descendants of slavery. That was Biden's idea. Kamala as well. She had that. If your child is truant, you're going to go to jail. But the way to keep crime down here in America is to make sure that people are being fed, people are being happy, there's generational wealth, that families are being taken care of, that people aren't living on the street, that people aren't living from paycheck to paycheck. That's how we keep crime down. And not only in the Black community with reparations, but also I have other friends of other nationalities have found it very difficult here in the COVID to keep a leg up. So universal basic income in place would help a lot of families to keep their leg up. But people are anxious, and they're scared of what may happen. So crime does go up when you are scared of what tomorrow is going to bring.
Yeah, I mean that I think many people understand. Like, they understand a lot of things we're talking about, from Medicare for all to the Green New Deal to ending these endless wars. And the problem of our political system is what the people want, what public opinion polls show the majority of people want, doesn't get translated into public policy with these two governing parties we got. I think what we're saying, in fact, I was on MSNBC last Friday, and they kind of set me up, on a spoiler thing. But after I gave them, the 90-second version of my stump speech, Willie Geist, the host, or one of the hosts, said, a lot of people agree with you, but you can't vote this year for you because Trump is so bad. That was basically their argument. But he admitted that what we're talking about is what the people want. And it's just a shame that we can't get in debates, we can't get on the ballot, we can't get coverage in the media. So we're just going to have to keep working at the grassroots and build a real party that is in the communities, where even if the people don't see us on TV, they see us on the street. They know who we are. Mm-hmm. And when the elections come around, they trust us. They know us. And that's, there's no substitute for that. This electronic media is great, but there's nothing like people knowing you in the communities, in the neighborhoods, in the towns. Because that, no matter how much they lie about you, if they know you, they know they're lying. So that's what we got to do. We got to become really good organizers.
Well, I believe.
We got a final question for you. This is from Remington Howell. How would you improve the lives of people with disability and update the program that we rely on?
I'm so glad you asked me that. I woke up about 3 years ago. In 2011, I woke up and I couldn't sit up. Every time I stood up, I passed out. I have an illness called severe orthostatic hypotension. I was in a wheelchair for 2.5 years, and they told me I would never, ever walk again. God is good. So a lot of the services that I had to depend on became really vital to me. I lost my job. I had been working for all of my life since I was 14, so I knew nothing else but to work. But thank God for Social Security, right? And when I say Social Security, I mean, when we talk about, when politicians speak of Social Security, I believe that they're speaking of state-funded Social Security. But I want to thank God for Social Security, RSDI, SSI. I received RSDI as a result of having worked so many years. I was eligible for RSDI, even though it wasn't even a portion of what I would have received had I not, had I been of retirement age. It was vital to making sure that I kept my apartment. It was vital to making sure that I could feed my son. And all of them, we have other entities here like PCAs, but we call them personal care attendants. My life still today would be unmanageable if I did not have my personal care attendants. There are some days where some days are much harder than others. Some days I wake up and I'm fully functioning, and some days I wake up and I can't walk to the kitchen. So I know the vitality of making sure that programs for disabled people stay in place. Programs like personal care attendants, programs like Social Security, programs like disabled housing, programs that make the lives of people like us more comfortable. And I have my wheelchair. You can't see it, but it's right there over there on the wall. Like some days I need it. But someday, for the most part, I've been blessed and I don't have to use it. But that's just looking at me. You can't tell that I'm disabled, but those programs saved my life. And I would make sure that other people who are disabled retain the programs that I know became so vital to me and my family.
I'm looking for another question to come up. Here we go. Zeke Kramer, how would you increase access to green, affordable public transportation in your district?
That's a good question. I hadn't, and I'm going to be honest with you, I hadn't really thought about the public transit system in my district, because what I would love to see happen is it totally dismantled and restructured. I believe that there should be more accessibility to places outside of Minneapolis where the jobs are here in Minnesota. In my district, there are more jobs in the suburbs than there are in Minneapolis, per se, for people without transportation, and they're unable to get to those jobs because of lack of transportation. So I would like a total rescheduling, restructuring of MTC here in my district. And not only that, I think that all buses should be electronic. I think that every bus, because of the carbon and the fuel that they use right now, I think they should all go electronic to clean for a more clean environment, more clean air, so we can breathe better. There are enough toxins that we're breathing today with COVID going on. We don't need the added toxins of non-electronic vehicles on our road.
Yeah, I would add that the Green New Deal, that you can look at our budget on the HowieHawkins.us website, and we want to really build out the public transportation system. First of all, rebuild the light rails, the trolleys that every city in this country had between the 1890s and the 1930s. And then the car took over. I mean, that's old technology. We can easily rebuild that and supplement it with electric vehicles, buses, and minibuses and regular buses. We need to have a rail transport between the cities. These high-speed trains that most countries have, reduce the need for air travel, which is one of the more difficult technologies to reduce carbon emissions. And we need to put a lot more freight on the rails, on electrified rails, so we're not spewing carbon into the atmosphere, or using a lot of resources, not just oil or diesel, but rubber and materials by trucking everything everywhere.
Right.
Electronic or electric trucks, UPS electric trucks or FedEx electric trucks should be the last leg on the journey of freight and packages. A lot of it should be on the freight rail. So one thing, if we implement a Green New Deal at the federal level, it would rebuild and build up public transportation in all the cities. Sophie Lubin asks, how would you make voting more available? Would you lower the voting age?
Definitely. Oh my God, my son has been political since he was 12, right? I can remember as a child myself, when I lived in Chicago, Mayor Burns being elected to office, and I believe that was in 1979. I was born in 1972. I think children are some of the smartest people in the world when it comes to politicians, and they have keen instinct when it comes to people. Definitely, I would at least lower it to 16. I think that the age of 16, you can make good physical choices for in politics at 16, and these choices affect your family. So when your family is when you're a teenager and you're in high school and your family is going to vote, that's an exciting time, right? They have mock votes or mock political actions in school because everyone wants to be involved in the political process, including young adults. When we're sick, we do a lot of things. You can emancipate when you're 16. There are a lot of things you can do at 16, but you can't vote. You can't be an active participant in your own life until you're out of high school. And if we look at the way that the mind of a teenager works, their minds still aren't fully developed until they're 25. Your mind still isn't fully developed. So from 16 to 18, there's not a lot of change, but you do have political knowledge and you are aware of what's going on in your country. I can go back even before then to forward. I was born. I remember being 2 or 3 years old and hearing my mother talk about the president in 1974. So I remember Jimmy Carter. I remember how excited that the ADOS community was when he got elected. And I remember how disappointed they were after they elected him. I remember all of that, right? And how it was when I became 18 and they finally let me vote. And that was that was so exciting. It was like Christmas the day before. It's like Christmas Eve. So I do believe that you 16 years old is adequate to vote. I would change the age personally.
Yeah, I'm so old I couldn't vote when I was 18. They hadn't passed that amendment yet. And I was facing the draft. And I got drafted. And I was at age 14 and 15 rooting for the Peace and Freedom Party in California because they were for peace in Vietnam and freedom was the civil rights slogan, and the two major parties were dragging their feet on that. And I just think of Greta Thunberg. You know, young people, they're not resigned. They haven't figured out they've been defeated. They're fighting for their future. You know, when Greta Thunberg schools the UN, hey, the last International Panel on Climate Change report said we got 420 gigatons carbon left in our carbon budget before we blow past the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures, which gets us into the real danger zone. And she gave them the math. It was like elementary school math, but these adults are there's so many things going on in their heads. She just cut right to the point. I think sometimes we need young folks because they aren't caught up in all the complications. They just get to the core. And they got a passion because they see that it's their future. And welcome, Angela. How you doing?
I'm exhausted. How are y'all?
Doing good.
No, don't let me interrupt.
So next question for Minister Tory Woodland, running for the 5th Congressional District of Minnesota, from Mark Z. Suck. I hope I pronounced that right. In my state, there's Proposition 113, which means they want a national popular vote. Do you support this?
In my state, they want a 113 proposition, which means they want national popular vote. Do you support this? I do. I do absolutely support the popular vote because I believe that the Electoral College takes away a lot of our choices. Like we go out and we spend our time and we cast our vote and say Howie wins the popular vote, but loses in the Electoral College. And it's the Electoral College that makes the decision about who our next president will be. So I am totally for casting the popular vote over. I believe that the voice of the people should be heard over a group of electors sitting somewhere off in America.
Yeah, I believe that proposition. There, a lot of states have adopted the position that once a majority, enough states that would constitute a majority of electoral votes agree to this compact, then those states will cast their electoral votes for the popular vote winner. And we're close. We're like, I forget the number, but we're very close to 270. And I think that's a good interim solution. Of course, what we're talking about in our campaign for president is replacing the electoral college with a national popular vote using ranked choice voting. So that, like up in Maine, they're going to do that this time. So there are progressives that are worried about Trump and thinking about voting for Biden. But in Maine, they can rank me 1 and Biden 2 and not worry about Trump. And that's the kind of thing we need nationally. And the Green Party certainly needs it because, it's black voter suppression in the electoral college that has got these losers of the popular vote like Donald Trump and George W. Bush installed in the presidency. And unfortunately, the Democratic Party spends all its effort blaming the Green Party, trying to keep us off the ballot and calling us spoilers. But I say they've spoiled the election because we've been giving them this proven nonpartisan solution for 20 years. They should get on board and let's get rid of this electoral college. They have a national popular vote using ranked choice voting for president. You're lousy. That must not be a real name. If we cut our military budget by half and end our imperialist wars, how do we keep the value of the dollar strong? The dollar is linked to oil, the petrodollar, and our wars protect the value. So sophisticated.
I'm gonna let you have that one, Howie.
Well, look, the value of our currency is based on the real resources we have to produce the goods and services we need. That's people, labor, that's the capital, the machinery and factories and offices and fields. And it's the natural resources, which the Greens know to emphasize and conventional economists don't. So the question is, do we have enough cash in the economy to employ those resources so everybody's employed, producing what we need? So I don't think the value of the dollar depends on imperialism because we can spend the money through the federal government to provide for our needs, and the private economy will do its share. And we get to full employment, then that's when we know we've put enough money into the economy. So I don't believe that the value of the dollar, in other words, our purchasing power depends on U.S. imperialism. In fact, I would argue the opposite. That's a waste hole. That's a waste of resources. And you spend money on bombs that you don't want to use, but if you do use them, they just blow up. There's nothing left. Although there are consequences for those on the receiving end, which is a debit in the economy. So I know that the people that run this country think they need to maintain their dominance economically using the military. But that's just the ruling people, the billionaire class. That's not the rest of us. So, sending money on the military is taking money and taking resources from what the people need: housing, healthcare, schools, and a clean environment. So while we got to pause, Angela, you want to say anything? Say hi.
Hi, I'm Angela. I apologize for my lateness. My workday started at 5 a.m. I literally got off my truck at 8 p.m. So, yeah, I don't know what I've missed so far and playing catch up, but hey, glad y'all are here. And this family reunion thing we do every week, I look forward to it and I hate missing y'all. So yeah, I made it.
I'm glad to see you.
Well, Mr. Toya, we really appreciate you being on, telling us about your campaign. And, we wish you the best of luck. And like I've been telling people, it doesn't end on November 3rd. We got to count the vote.
Yes.
Then keep on going on these issues. And it's been a tough year for us. Anybody but Trump mania has made it particularly difficult. But if Biden is the next administration, won't be too long before the honeymoon's over, and all these progressives who are saying vote for Biden and run up the vote, they're going to come looking for us because they're not going to get solutions from the Democrats.
That's correct. Well, thank you so much for having me. Remember to go to www.willingfor5thdistrict.org. Share my page, like my page on Facebook, Willing for Congress. Donate. Donate by all means. We have 3 weeks left in this campaign, and we are doing the very best that we can. We're getting out there, getting to know people, just hitting really hard, and I'm just really grateful that you guys had me on, and I thank you for this opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'll see you next time I'm in Minnesota, I hope.
All right. I look forward to it.
All right, good. Well, Angela, you have any general thoughts while we're waiting for a question for us?
Just thinking about the past presidential or vice presidential debate, the fact that it left me with a climate grief hangover bigger than, hush baby, a serious climate grief hangover. And then I was on Twitter and saw that Greta Thunberg, now I don't know how true this is, but people were very disappointed to see that she, had endorsed or, spoken in favor of the Biden-Harris ticket. And it's just like, what in the world is happening right now? All I can do is chalk it up to Mercury retrograde, because good God. But just thinking about the fact that I don't know what it's going to take for people to care about climate change. I mean, really care about it, and I'm not talking about, our folks here. We know y'all are all about it. But like the average person, who's just living their life and doing their, going through their day and things like that. And then living in South Carolina, I'm thinking about all these farmers who are seriously affected. It's cotton season down here, and a lot of, we've had a lot of rain. Some of these fields have lakes in them that should not be lakes. So just thinking about how, closely farmers are impacted by climate change, and how closely, people along the coast, seafood's a big thing down here. That's been a problem, because of climate change and the ocean warming, things like that. So it's just like, how do we get people to feel this closely, that are not necessarily in our circles? So that's what's been on my mind. Hey, Max Mobius, Howie and Angela. In what ways is your Green New Deal better than the Democrats who you say watered it down? They did water it down. We didn't say it, they did it. One of the biggest differences is that we're not playing patty cake with frackers. I mean, we're done with fracking. That's out. Senator Harris was like, we're going to rejoin the Paris Accords. And all I could think was, it doesn't matter if you join the Paris Accord if you're still fracking. It makes no sense. You're not stopping the very thing that you're in the Paris Accord to do. I can't. And so when we're talking about, Green New Deal, as Howie says, Mr. President over there says all the time, we have a full strength Green New Deal. We are not with the new fossil fuel infrastructure. We are not, going into nuclear, continuing to use nuclear energy as our thing. I mean, as far as I know, and y'all can correct me on this, Fukushima is still leaking into the Atlantic. I mean, the Pacific. It's been a long day. Into the Pacific, it's problematic. And banning fracking, which I was asked the other day, would you ban fracking? I was like, yes, outright banning fracking. We should not be having earthquakes in North Carolina. So, Mr. President, you wrote this. It's your thing.
Yeah, the Democrats are no longer watering down the Green New Deal. They buried it. And if you didn't follow that, didn't realize that, you weren't paying attention. But after the presidential debate, when Biden said, "I'm not for the Green New Deal," he had to say it twice, because in the middle of his second comment there, he kind of threw in Green New Deal, and Chris Wallace had to say, "What? Did you say Green New Deal?" And, "Oh, no, not me, not Biden. It's not in the Democratic platform." Now, the Green New Deal that we've been talking about in the Green Party is a plan to get to 100% clean energy and zero greenhouse gas emissions in a decade by 2030. And after the midterms in 2018, the Sunrise Movement with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in Pelosi's office demanding a Green New Deal, a select committee for a Green New Deal. And while they didn't spell out what that would entail, Pelosi didn't want a select committee that could put legislation on the floor. She wanted to run it through her climate committee, which she handpicked with a bunch of people that, well, some of whom, including the chair, have taken money from the oil and gas industry. So they came back with the non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal. And that eliminated the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, which was in the Green Party's Green New Deal. It eliminated the phase out of nuclear power. It eliminated cuts in the military budget to put those resources into the Green New Deal. And it extended the deadline by 20 years to 2050. And then Pelosi never let him vote on it in the House. And when McConnell had him vote on it in the Senate to put all the Democrats on the record who are running for president, Schumer and Markey, who co-sponsored this non-binding resolution, said, "Oh, that's a trick. We're going to vote present." And all the good little Democrats did, except they voted no with the Republicans. So there isn't even a Green New Deal from the Democratic Party. There's our Green New Deal, and then there's some talk about it in the climate justice movement, but they don't have a plan like we do. Go to our website. We go through all the productive sectors. We're going to transform not just energy, but transportation, buildings, manufacturing, and agriculture. We cost it out. It creates 38 million jobs. We need that now for economic recovery as well as climate recovery. I mean, this is a program that will put America back to work, building our economy so it's safe for the climate and it's ecologically sustainable. And we know the people want it. After the Green New Deal went sort of viral, the media ate up that sit-in in Pelosi's office. They polled nationally, and over 80% of Americans wanted a Green New Deal at that time, including 64% of Republicans. So back to the question, I think people are concerned about climate change. The problem is their vested interests that fight it. They don't want to deal with that. They just want to keep making money from oil and gas and coal and nukes and so forth. And everybody's preoccupied with this pandemic and the economic consequences of that. So while climate has been pushed back in terms of the priorities people have, it doesn't mean they're not concerned. And I think in the next administration, I would expect, I mean, it's hard to do worse than Trump has on public health measures to suppress the COVID-19 virus. So we should improve in that regard. And then we're going to be back to the same issues that we've been emphasizing: the climate meltdown, the growing inequality and declining life expectancies of the working class in this country. And then I hope we can get a movement going, and the Green Party should really play a leadership role in this because nobody else is. We got a new nuclear arms race going on. New strategic nukes and tactical nukes are being deployed. The Russians are doing the same thing. The Chinese are doing the same thing. And the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight. And I think this is the kind of issue where we need the Green Party more than ever to get organized enough that it can start initiating actions in a movement. I mean, there's small peace groups talking about it, but they don't have the kind of networks and base that we do. And I guess I'm suggesting to the Greens out there, after this election, we need to look at that as a major campaign, along with the Green New Deal and the Economic Bill of Rights.
Courtney White, is there a way to ensure that people don't lose jobs if there's an end to the fossil fuel industry?
That's called the just transition. And as part of our Green New Deal, we guarantee 5 years of current wages and benefits for anybody who's displaced by phasing out the fossil fuel industry, cutting back on the military production, and transitioning to civilian production. Going to a Medicare for all system where a lot of paper pushers will no longer be needed because it's a lot more efficient. So we got to retrain those people to actually deliver health care instead of paper clips and staplers and that kind of stuff. So there's that just transition is needed for a lot of sectors of the economy we want to transition. The other thing to say is this creates 38 million jobs. Check out the budget, check out our numbers. It's based on, actual practice in the various industries and the kind of production and things we want to build. There's going to be plenty of jobs in the Green New Deal. So people in the fossil fuel industry shouldn't worry. And I'll add this too. The idea of a just transition, which used to be called at one point the Superfund for Workers, because there was a corporate superfund for companies who went bankrupt to clean up the environment. And people in the oil, chemical, and atomic workers were saying, why not a Superfund for workers? Because these were the people in the dirtiest industries: oil, chemicals, and nuclear power and weapons production. And that union said, this is killing us. We want to get out of this industry into something better: civilian production, green production. So back in the early 80s, they came up with this idea, which was called first the Superfund for Workers, and then the GI Bill for workers, modeled after the GI Bill after World War II. And then it's now called the just transition. But what I'm saying is the workers in those industries, at least the organized ones in the oil, chemical, and atomic workers union, that came up with this idea. And unfortunately, that union was a great union. It's merged into the paper workers and then the steel workers. And that legacy, they were a very democratic union. I went to one of their conventions one time. They had knockdown, drag out arguments on this stuff, but they let the rank and file speak, unlike a lot of unions. And I miss them. We used to work with them in the anti-nuclear movement. That's how I got involved in that.
And I just want to jump in super quick because I keep seeing a question about animal rights and do we support animal rights? We do. We do not believe in using animals for testing of things that people use. We don't support factory farming of animals. Stop, Dita. We don't support the abuse of animals that we're seeing. I mean, and I just wanted to speak to it because I keep saying it. Where do we stand on animal rights? And Mr. President, if you want to elaborate, what do you think?
The only thing I'd add is, our Green New Deal has a agricultural program. We want to end factory farming, these concentrated animal feed operations. We want to get corporations out. We want to get these private equity firms that now own a lot of the farmland from Wall Street, turning what's left of family farmers into tenant farmers. Want to get the chemicals out, the chemical fertilizers, the herbicides, the insecticides, and go back to organic agriculture with family farms where the farmer actually owns their own farm. And we provide parity pricing for all commodities, not just the ones that now get support. So all the fruits and vegetables and dairy products. And so that the farmers have, their costs of production are covered. That's what parity pricing does. It covers basic costs of production for farm inputs, and it increases when the cost of those inputs increase. So that's like a floor for farmers in terms of their income. And then we'd have supply management programs so we don't have gluts and shortages of products, which makes the price fluctuate. And if you get caught on the wrong side of that curve when it's time to sell your product, it can really hurt you. So we really want to support the family farmers going out of business fast. And then you got the You know, the Monsantos, which now Bayer has bought, with their seeds that, you know, you can only get from them. You can't keep seeds for the future. And the seeds create plants that require, you know, very
Their product.
like Roundup, which is making a lot of people sick all over the world. So we want to, you know, go from agribusiness, corporate profit-oriented agribusiness, back to agriculture that spawns agroecologies, as they call them, that are harmonized with their regional environment, not exploiting them. So, and, you know, stopping the misuse and abuse of animals in these factory farms and concentrated animal feed operations is a big part of that agricultural transition we want to see. Sophie Lubin, what are you going to do with the current military? How about the Space Force?
No, we want to defund the military for any number of reasons. When you're talking about reducing our carbon footprint worldwide, our military has, if not the largest carbon footprint in the world, one of the largest carbon footprints in the world. And so if we are serious as an administration about doing our part to initiate reversing climate change, one of those major things that has to happen needs to be the reduction of the military. And I, you know, for folks who, you know, may not be aware, if you look at the budget for this country, the lion's share of it goes to the military. And so, you know, all of the things that we're being told we can't fund, wraparound services that communities need, you know, housing, transportation, all of these things, you know, that build infrastructure that we're constantly being told that we can't do. We can do that if you defund the military and bring those resources home and also bring those personnel home. We're talking about, you know, where Howie mentioned earlier about a just transition. The same thing works for military personnel. You can retrain folks to do these green jobs, rebuilding infrastructure. And also, I think there's a part in our platform where, you know, folks who are, or is that for folks in college? I'm tired. So where people get a stipend, like during the GI Bill, that's for college. But yeah, with the just transition, people are, you know, military personnel will be able to be retrained to do green infrastructure jobs. And you can elaborate, Mr. President.
Yeah, the question had two parts, and I don't remember the two parts. I know it was about cutting the military budget. We're calling for a 75% cut. Even then, we'd still have the largest military budget in the world. Our current military budget is not about defending United States territory. It's about defending the profit interests of global banks and corporations based in the United States, and in intervening in other countries and trying to install governments favorable to our corporations, which means repression, so they don't regulate these corporations with respect to the environment or labor standards. That doesn't do us any good in this country. In fact, it's against our interests, because then these same corporations play us off against workers in those other countries and say, hey, if you don't take concessions, if you don't let us pollute, we're just going to move to these other countries where we can get away with it. So it comes back to bite us. The CIA calls foreign intervention, the unintended consequences, blowback. And the unintended consequences of this global military empire are what Angela was talking about. We don't deploy our resources. And I like to think of it not in terms of cash money, because the government can always print money and spend it through the federal budget to pay for things. But in terms of the real resources we have, when we have our scientists and engineers and factories producing weapons instead of homes and solar panels and wind generators and mass transit, that's a real loss. It's the cash thing is not the big problem. It's the misallocation of our productive resources. That's the real negative consequences of militarism in this country. And we, unlike we're the world's global military empire, we're real powerful, but we have more poverty. We have declining life expectancies. It's concentrated in the working class, but the whole country's life expectancies have been going down the last 4 or 5 years because of growing inequality, inability of people to access healthcare and housing and decent food. I mean, it's inexcusable. And I think I was saying earlier, I've been on interviews all day, but what the American people want doesn't translate into the public policies we get. And that brings us back to why we need the Green Party.
Corey Payton, and I saw this a little bit earlier. If you win office, how do you plan on working with a House and Senate run by a dualistic party with opposing views? That's a presidential question.
Yeah, well, if we win, we will have an incredible mandate. We will have made the most historic, massive comeback or mobilization of support in American history. And unlike Biden and Trump, who it's sometimes hard to understand what they're really for, we're real clear. Green New Deal, economic Bill of Rights, end this nuclear arms race and the endless wars and get our priorities straight. That's for starters, but it's real clear. So we would have a mandate. So we could go to the House certainly and say, hey, if this is what the people want, and if you don't get on board, there are plenty of Greens ready to run for your seat in 2 years. And some of those senators will be coming up in 2 years. But what I'm saying is that mandate can be used because politicians, while they like to ignore us and pay attention more to their donors and their voters, they do need those votes to get into office. So we would have some leverage there. And, I think there's a progressive caucus in Congress. Only about 25 of them you can count on, even though it's the biggest caucus. And last time I looked, it was over 125 members. But that hardcore 25, they really have a friend in the White House for a change. And they would have more leverage within their party and the Congress. So it's politics. And then the other thing is the mandate, the mobilization that got us elected would have to stay mobilized and keep the heat on. Because, people, like a lot of liberals thought, oh, we elected Obama. We can go home now. It's all taken care of. And he became the deporter in chief. He didn't prosecute the criminals from the Great Recession. He didn't prosecute the war criminals who committed torture in the name of the American people. His stimulus bill was mostly tax cuts instead of doing what progressives used to do in this country, have the government directly employ people and make things that the private sector has failed to do. He became a very conservative president, but people kind of went to sleep. They didn't realize it. The escalation of the drone strikes, the Terror Tuesdays, where he'd sit in the office and decide who to assassinate with drones. And then he leaked that to the New York Times to show he was a tough guy when he's running against Romney. I mean, this is what the liberals settled for, and they weren't paying attention. So if Angela not getting there, we're going to make sure y'all pay attention and stay mobilized because, there's a whole power structure that has power outside the elections because they're the ones with the money. They decide whether to invest or not. Capital can go on a strike like labor and wreck the economy. And, the people need to back up any moves we make against the power of capital. So those are some of the things that in your hypothetical we'll have to deal with. I think the reality is in this election, we got to fight to make sure the vote is counted. And we give it to Trump. The Greens get all the ballot lines they're entitled to. And then we keep fighting for our issues. Ric Flair, hi guys. Real talk here right now. It's my grandma's birthday today, Norma Stitz. Can you give her a shout out, please?
Happy birthday, Miss Norma.
Yeah, shout out to Norma Stitz. And happy birthday, Grandma.
And Fred's got a birthday in the chat too. So happy birthday, Fred.
Happy birthday.
Because I was reading it. I think we getting the cane. Yep.
Yeah, the boss says our time's up.
Getting the cane, Mr. President.
Okay, well, I did say that, you know, in one of my recent comments that we got to make sure the vote is counted. Be ready on election day. If you can be a poll watcher and you official poll watcher, and in some states, I'm the one that has to sign your poll watching certificate. I'm ready to do that. In other states, it's got to be a party official, or you just go to the Board of Election, find out how to do that so you can observe polling places and protest, object, and document any funny business going on, whether it's one of these militias showing up to try to intimidate people or demonstrators trying to intimidate people inside the perimeter that polling places have around them, or Republican lawyers in there questioning people's right to vote, people in the polling places who may be told they're not on the rolls and they think they are. They're entitled to a provisional ballot. And then you got to make sure those are counted because most of those aren't. All those kinds of things. And, you know, most states have ways of getting educated on that. We can help you with that. So first thing is election protection on election day. And then we got to be ready to make sure the vote is counted. And all these crazy ideas that Trump is talking about, like stopping the count of the mail-in ballots and declaring victory, and then having his, you know, little ragtag racist vigilante groups out there trying to scare people. And even talking about, you know, like Pennsylvania has a Republican majority in the legislature. And even if Biden loses Trump loses the popular vote in Pennsylvania, legislature just might say the electors are pro-Trump and send them to the electoral college. There's all kind of crazy things they're planning to do. So we got to be ready to protect the election. That's like the first thing. And then I think we will. I don't think Trump and his people can pull this off. Most of everybody from Wall Street to former generals to a lot of Republicans are saying we've had enough of this Trump. So I think we can do that, but we got to be sure because the Democrats historically, Angela knows this, 2000 in Florida, you know, you had black voter suppression, you had hanging chads in counties that were disproportionately black and they weren't counted. And Angela's out there on the street with a lot of people saying count the votes. The Republicans are out on the street too. The Brook Brothers riot. All these congressional aides, you know, in their little suits were down there telling them stop the count. And Gordon Lieberman said, we got this in the courts. And they didn't. And the Supreme Court eventually installed Bush. So the Democrats do have an army of lawyers ready to go to the courts, but they don't like people in the streets. And you know, in the end, I mean, the last resort may be a general strike. We just stop working until they get that election counted. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, like I said, I think Biden's honeymoon won't last that long. And then progressive-minded people are going to be looking for an alternative. And we need to be ready.
And I actually took off just thinking about the fact that I was, as Howie alluded to, I was a voter in Florida in 2000, where, you know, Jeb Bush, the governor of the state at that time, essentially did hand over the state to his brother George. I mean, it was ridiculous. And I think for me, that marked the point in my history as a voter where I could see very clearly that they're not trying to hide it anymore, you know? So, you know, and a few years ago, I worked election protection with the ACLU. You know, I saw somebody in the chat mention that, you know, I'll have to be politically neutral that day. We know how to do this, you know, and the person that I had removed from the polling place was at that time, a sitting Wisconsin state representative for intimidating voters. So for people who think that this isn't real or, you know, that, you know, this doesn't really happen, yes, it absolutely does happen. You know, people encroach. You can see it particularly in states where voters have to bring documentation because you need voter ID. They want to make sure they have everything. You can see the trepidation on their faces, and you've got some person in a tie and a suit walking up on them, looking at them menacingly. You can see it in their faces. And sometimes you just you standing there with your clipboard, smiling. You don't have to say anything. Really, you can't say anything, not to them. But they'll look at you, and you send reassurance. It does matter. And so I'm planning to do election protection if I'm able to do it. I would encourage anyone that can to do it, and be supportive in any way that you can. I think there's going to be a lot happening this election day. It's going to be completely unprecedented. So I think we should be optimistic, but we should also be ready.
All right, everybody have a good evening, and we'll see you next week.
Y'all take care.